So, so I know that you guys have gone through Genesis 1 through 11 recently. And so what I'm hoping to do this morning after talking to Pastor Alf about this is to walk through some of the science and that backs up what we see in the scriptures. And scripture is the truth. We go by the scripture always. But the problem is in life today, in a lot of schools today, the schools are teaching a science that is contradictory to what's in the Bible. And it's, just to give you a quick story for myself is that I'm a dentist by profession. I was a chemistry math double major in college. And I went through schooling thinking evolution was true, thinking we actually came from monkeys. And it wasn't until I had gotten saved after dental school and went to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, which if you guys haven't gone yet, go. Go see the Creation Museum, go see the Ark Encounter. It's a great time down there. But it opened my eyes. And I got to see that there is a lot of science that has been suppressed from schools. And so we're going to talk about just a little bit of that today and how it actually, the real science supports what the scriptures teach in this. So before we jump into it, let's open up in a word of prayer. Lord, I just thank you for gathering us together today and I just ask you to prepare the hearts and minds of everyone in here to learn more about your creation and allow Genesis 1 to just come alive today between Sunday school and the sermon. It's in your holy and precious name we pray. Amen. So we're going to talk about the origin of humans this morning. Where did we actually come from? Because if you talk to scientists, they will say that we came from monkeys, which eventually came from fish, and we were once part of a rock that crawled out of the water. It's really crazy to think about. And there was actually, just in the last couple of days, I posted this on my Facebook, there's an article that just came out saying that they believe that our fingers came from fish's behinds, evolutionarily. I kid you not. It is the most ridiculous thing I've read yet on the idea of evolution. What's that? No, from the butts. Literally says that in this article. A mainstream scientific article says our fingers came from their behinds. So yeah, this is what we are seeing out there. They're almost making a mockery out of us, certainly making a mockery out of God. So where do humans actually come from? Well, let's start with a biblical foundation, and that's the existence of God. Here's the reality. Without a creator God, nothing could exist. Everything we see in this world, both the material and immaterial, all had to start from somewhere. Now, evolutionists want to say, well, you guys believe that God has always been there. How foolish are you? To which we would say, wait a minute, you guys think it was always a rock, or it was always or energy, this energy ball, or whatever it was. And there's a lot of different theories out there on this. But the point is, you always have to start with something. What is that something? And in the Bible, it teaches God is that something or someone who started everything. Now, I don't have time to get into all of that today, why this makes perfect sense, but you always have to have a starting point. And the starting point is much easier when you look at the design of the world. It came from a designer, God, not through random chemical chance processes. Genesis 1:27, day 6 of creation, is where we actually see the creation of man. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created him. So how did God create humans? Well, he doesn't say, other than he spoke them into existence. And on day 6 is when this happened. He created male and female. Now, this is also verified in other areas of the Bible. Mark 10:6, Christ, in his earthly ministry, said this, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So Jesus is corroborating what was stated in Genesis 1, that from the beginning, we've had male and female. Now, just to kind of tidy this up even more, Acts 17:26 says, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and their boundaries of their habitation. So not only did God create man and woman in the beginning, but every man and woman that has ever been made, ever been born, came from the original two, Adam and Eve. And you would obviously get that sense if you read Genesis and believe exactly what it says as you read Genesis. But it's also verified in other parts of Scripture, like here in Acts. And so in Acts, every man, woman comes from the original man and woman, and every nation comes from them, which verifies what we see in Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel and the dispersion at the Tower of Babel. Now, part 2, we're going to talk about mutations and evolution. So it's pretty easy to establish you must have a creator or designer for everything that we see today. But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about mutations and evolution. Because let's assume, it's a wrong assumption, but let's assume that we came about through random chemical chance processes. If you believe the scientists, or some scientists out there, they would tell you that we started off with some type of matter, we started off with some type of energy ball, or this point that was this infinitely dense point that somehow exploded. And then after it exploded, you have these chemical reactions that occur, and eventually life somehow pops up out of non-life. And what we see with this is this idea of evolution of humans. Where do they actually come from? And when you talk about this idea of this point of matter that explodes, you have to have this matter come from somewhere. You have to have this matter that explodes and somehow becomes life. So how does all this matter through random chemical reactions come together and actually make things that are living rather than just dead sitting on the ground? Even when you get this living matter, how do you get the living matter to transform into other living matter over time? And then, of course, right from the beginning, how do you get these chemicals that start life to begin with? Because while they tell us, oh, look, we got random chemical reactions, we have dirt, we have other things, how did that actually chemically turn into life one day? Now, we don't have time for all these things today, but we're going to just touch on 2 of them, the idea of transitional fossils and no working mechanism for change. So we'll talk about mutations here. Now, let's give the scientists this idea. Let's allow them to tell us that you magically had pond scum or dirt coalesce together through random chemical reactions and make the first living cell. Mind you, in science, it is a known scientific law you cannot get life from non-life. They know this, we know this, it makes perfect sense, but yet, for evolution to be true, they have to ignore their own law, and they have to pretend that slime, that goo, that dirt came together and formed that first living cell. So here's what we're going to talk about now, is not only can that not happen, but let's just give it to them. Let's give them that first cell. Okay, so that cell, to go from a single simple cell into a human being, do you guys think it would take more information or less information for that to happen? If you go from a single cell to the complex human being, more, right? It would take more information for that to occur. So that means then that there has to be, for this to be scientific, to call this science observable science, testable, repeatable, verifiable, and falsifiable science. That's the true definition for science. We must have a mechanism known that takes a single cell and makes it into all the complex life we see today. Because it's not just humans that are complex. Trees are really complex. Bugs are really complex. Birds are complex. Everything we see is complex today. So how did this all come about? So there's got to be a mechanism. And that mechanism is what we call mutations. So mutations, of all the mechanisms scientists talk about, they all rely upon mutations. And so I talk about this because if you read a scientific journal, you read a scientific textbook, a biology textbook, it'll all tell you gene duplication, adaptation, natural selection, and they give all these big terms as to how evolution supposedly works. But they all rely upon this idea of mutations. Okay, so mutations. Mutations is what causes new information in their minds. That's what they want to tell us. How logical are mutations? Do they actually work? Are they actually observable? We're going to talk about this in just a couple of different ways. And this is what I like to teach on, even though some of this seems a little bit high level. We're going to bring it down to even kids level right now. A way for all of us to understand, because these are things we can actually talk to a PhD scientist about. We can be very intelligible in how we speak about this. They will not be able to answer you. They will not be able to contradict you when we talk about these things. So we're going to talk about now the 1%, what I call the 1% challenge. It is claimed that we and monkeys share 98 to 99% of all DNA. You will read this in every biology textbook. You'll read this in every magazine out there. And so the textbooks promote this. Biology textbooks talk about this. If you walk over to the University of Findlay and do some open air preaching, which I would encourage you guys to do, you got it right here, and you have a biology professor come out and engage with you, they will tell you this exact same stuff. We're 1% difference from a chimpanzee or a monkey. So how do we talk about this to them? Well, first of all, their claim goes back to 1975. The Human Genome Project didn't occur until the 1990s. It wasn't completed till around the year 2000. So they were making these claims that we were 1% different than a chimpanzee way before we actually could read the DNA. Which means they pulled these claims out of thin air. They had no business doing this. In 1975, all they did is they looked at some chunks. They couldn't get into the DNA level. They looked at some chunks of the DNA, and they saw some comparisons. Now, this is where it's absolutely crazy. They took the DNA, even as we were discovering DNA and able to do the whole genome and map it all by the late 1990s, early 2000s, they took the entire DNA sequencing. And then they looked at what are called the hot zones. So after they matched up humans and chimps, they found a hot zone that seemed to match up a little bit better. Within the hot zones, they found what are called the super hot zones that seemed to match up even better. And within those super hot zones, there was a 1% difference. So they ignored the entirety of the DNA chain and only took a small portion to get their 1%. Again, the first draft wasn't completed until 2001 to 2005. Now, in 2007, as they analyzed the DNA more, they found the real difference wasn't 1%, it was actually closer to 5%. As they continued years later to look at the human versus chimp DNA, it was found that there was actually a 15% difference. Now, some of you might think, well, wait a minute, 15% difference, that means we're like 85% chimpanzee. That's still pretty similar. Well, we're going to show you why it's not similar at all. We actually share something like 60% DNA with a watermelon. So it doesn't mean a whole lot when we understand these percentages. A couple of quotes here for you. Jeffrey Tompkins, PhD in genetics, said, based on the most recent unbiased and comprehensive research, chimp DNA is no more than 85% similar to human. So our best research, according to 2017, 15% difference. Brian Thomas, PhD in paleobiochemistry, human and chimp DNA sequences share about 85% similarity, not the 98% that classroom textbooks often cite. Now this is where it gets fun. Brian Thomas, when he looked at the DNA strands, and the 15% difference, what does that actually correlate to? How many changes in DNA between a chimp and a human would you have to have for evolution to be true? That 15% comes out to 450 million base pair differences. So while 15% seems like we're pretty similar, there's actually 450 million differences between us and a chimpanzee. And that's best case scenario. We'll talk about why that's not even that is not accurate, giving them way too much credit. But the point I want to get into with all of this, and this is where we can really simplify some things, is if it takes 450 million differences to get from a chimpanzee to a human, we're not talking about dirt to the first cell. We're not talking about the first cell to the fish. We're not talking about the fish to the thing that crawled out of the ocean to what made monkeys to made humans. Right? I'm not talking about all those differences and all those changes that would have been needed. I'm talking strictly a chimpanzee to a human. If there's 450 million differences between the two, how many transitional fossils at a bare minimum should there be? Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more information. Evolution says that every time something evolves, it's going to do it one step at a time. So one change each time. If there's 450 million differences between a chimpanzee and a human, what is the minimum amount of transitions we need between a chimp and a human? 450 million, thank you. Yes, see, it was really that simple. 450 million changes must occur, which means 450 million, if you have evolution that is working perfectly, which means that somehow this organism knew to change this one gene in his kids. So now there's 450 million minus one needed. And then his kids perfectly do one more. And then his kids perfectly do one more. And his kids, it would take 450 million steps for this to happen. Now, okay, if I find, now we're just simple math here. If I find one chimpanzee in the ground buried, and I find one human in the ground buried, on average, how many transitions should I find in the ground? I'll give you the answer, 450 million. Right? I mean, if we're just using statistics, statistically, if I find one human, one chimp, I should find one of each of the transitions too. That's common sense. It's good math right there. So we should find 450 million transitions. Now, if you talk to scientists or look in biology textbooks, how many transitions have they thought they've found so far? 5? 6? Depending on which article you read. Lucy's one of them. By the way, all these transitions they say they have are either humans or chimps. They're not, there's nothing that's halfway in between. Nothing that they have. They manipulate the models, they manipulate the bones. In Cleveland Natural History Museum, you can see how they manipulate the hips. The way the hip structure is for Lucy, they actually, if you want something fun, email me later, have Pastor Ralph email me later, and I'll show you, I'll give you a video. I have this copy. On PBS like 25 years ago, there was a scientist who was trying to figure out the correlation between Lucy and a human. And what he did is the hip structure of Lucy is exactly that of an ape. So what he did is he theorized, well, wait a minute, Lucy is a transition. The hips don't match a human whatsoever. It's not even in between. It's clearly an ape. So what he did is he, I kid you not, 2-hour special, takes out a Dremel. They had a cast of Lucy's hips. They broke her hips. He Dremels it out and then glues it back together. That's the model that is used in many museums across the country. And what his theory was is that somehow Lucy's bones, which were transitional, they somehow broke apart when after Lucy had died and magically fossilized back together to look more like an ape rather than what they assumed it to be, which is a transition. And he does this with a straight face as he's dremeling these bones. It's insane. It's a total fraud. And every one of their skeletons are total frauds. So I say this because if there's one human and one chimp in the fossil record, there should be 450 million on average transitional fossils. But yet they're only showing us 5, maybe 6. What gets better than that? If I find 10 humans in the fossil record, by the way, there's way more than 10 humans in the fossil record. If I find 10 humans and then 10 chimps, how many transitional fossils on average should I find? Multiply that by 10. It should be, yeah. So it now becomes 4.5 billion. I'm sorry, 4.5 billion. Now, if I have 100 and 100, it becomes 45 billion. If I have 1,000 and 1,000, we're getting into our high billions into trillions. Now, why do I say all this? If there were trillions of fossils out there, which would be absolutely required if evolution were true, we shouldn't see dirt out here. We should be tripping over our fossils. The entire Earth should be stacked right now with these trillions of transitions. And mind you, this is only chimps to humans. This isn't everything else that is supposedly evolved. Now, I bring this up because when Charles Darwin wrote his book on the origin of species back in the late 1850s, on the back cover as well as in this book, 2 different times he writes that there is a problem with his theory of natural selection. And his problem was the Earth doesn't seem to support, through the transitional fossils, his theory. The bones are missing. We don't know where they are. And he says one of the biggest boons of this theory in the future is if we never discover these fossils, it's going to show his theory is wrong. Well, we are over 150 years since his book was published. And where are all the fossils? They're not there. He's wrong. So we can talk to a scientist about this very intelligibly, that we should have these bones everywhere. We shouldn't see dirt. We shouldn't see anything but bones. And yet, we can't find them. We can dig through fossil layers. You can go to Grand Canyon, go to other areas. You can dig. You find very little fossils. What they claim about fossils is just not true. There's some out there, like dinosaurs. You would expect dinosaurs are everywhere. You know how many dinosaur fossils we actually have found? Only a couple dozen of each dinosaur kind. There's not that many that we have found. There's more buried, a lot in Montana and stuff, but there's not that many that are found. So there aren't the bones that they claim to be. So we're going to press this one just a little bit further. David DeWitt says this: the use of percentages has always obscured the magnitude of the differences. For example, 1.23% of the reported differences are single base pair substitutions. Doesn't sound like much until you realize it represents about 35 million mutations. What he's saying here is if we even take the scientist's view that we're only 1.23% different than a chimp, that still results in 35 million transitions at a minimum. Perfect evolution, 1 point at a time, no bad mutations whatsoever, 35 million is the minimum. Scientists can't look at this research and be honest about what these numbers actually mean. I have used this numerous times with PhD scientists. So we're going to skip ahead here and get to what I call a power question. And I like to ask this to scientists. Show me any observational evidence for where the vast amount of information or DNA come from that does not require me to use faith. Where are the mutations? Where are the fossils that caused all this evolution you say happened to happen? So let's talk about mutations for just a moment. This is probably my favorite one to use. And so going back to what I said about 10 minutes ago, to go from a single simple cell all the way to complex life, the only mechanism that exists is mutations. It doesn't matter what they tell you in terms of natural selection, adaptation, gene duplication, and other terms. All of those rely upon mutations. Mutations, think of it this way, it's a magical thing that happens where somehow a new trait or something towards a new trait develops out of random chemical reactions. That's the evolutionary view of these mutations. So in our genetic code, something's got to pop up. Now, okay, if mutations are the only known mechanism, according to scientists, then our question, if we are putting our thinking caps on, our question to them should be, okay, if you're calling this science, then you should be able to show me observational evidence of mutations that have actually increased information. Is that a fair question? Right? If they're going to claim this, and they call it science, and it must be observational, testable, repeatable, verifiable, they should show us a mutation. Well, let's talk about these mutations then. This is what we actually see in science. Now, do mutations sound good or bad, by the way? Bad, right? This is not a good term. They try to use it as a good term. It's not a good term. The vast majority of mutations, so they come in detrimental, neutral, and beneficial mutations. The vast majority of mutations are what we call detrimental. It's a loss of function, and it means you have disease. Does anybody want that type of mutation? No. 99% of mutations are detrimental. Well, that leads to no evolution. How about now neutral mutations? Lots of mutations are what we perceive to be neutral mutations. So every one of us has mutations. In fact, our kids are going to have somewhere between 50 and 100 mutations more than we have. That is true of every successive generation. What we're not sure of if that's linear or if that's exponential. It's most likely exponential, meaning that every successive generation will keep accumulating more and more mutations until we can't even reproduce anymore. Now, this should make sense because what does the Bible say? The entire earth, the entire creation in Hebrews 1 is wearing out like an old garment. We are in a state of decay, a total state of decay. Our bodies, our genomes are in a total state of decay. It actually matches up with what the Bible teaches when we look at observational evidence. So even in these neutral mutations that they say are neutral, it looks like our bodies are functioning correctly. And yet we have certain mutations that are causing either disease or what appears to be no change, but a disease on the inside. And I'll give you an example of that. There are people who have a gene that is missing that causes methylation of certain vitamins. So especially moms, you've heard of methylated vitamins. You know, folic acid is not the thing to take, it's methylfolate. Folic acid is the chemical version of it. Methylfolate is the biological form that we can actually take. Now, if you take folic acid and you have the right gene, you can change folic acid into methylfolate and actually use it. If, however, you're one of the 15 to 20% of the population that is missing that gene, folic acid is now poisonous to you and you can't use it. The thing is it appears neutral because you can't tell by just looking at somebody. Even though they have that disease process occurring, they're building up a toxicity with folic acid. This is one of numerous genes that have these mutation issues that appear neutral but are actually disease. Now, that doesn't result in evolution either. It leaves us to one class left, and it's called the beneficial mutations. Now, beneficial is interesting because for evolution to occur, for it to be scientific, you must have a mutation that is somehow beneficial to our bodies. Right? That's the only way we can get increased information for us. So you have to have added information through these beneficial mutations, and then you have to make sure that that beneficial mutation that arose is actually passed on to your offspring, passed on to your kids, so that they now carry that beneficial mutation going forward. That's the only way that this works. Now, here's the power question that I like to ask my scientist friends, or when I'm on a college campus. Of all the mutations that have ever been discovered, we don't even need to talk about detrimental and neutral. Let's just talk about beneficial mutations. Of all the beneficial mutations that have ever been discovered, how many of them have ever been shown to increase information in the body? That's the question I ask them. And do you know what that answer is? 0. There is not a single known mutation that has increased information. Ever in science. Not for humans, not for animals, not for plants. There's not a single one that increases information. Now you might say, wait a minute, Dr. Silvestro, there are scientists that say that we have beneficial mutations like antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They had a beneficial mutation. So how do you answer that one? Well, let me tell you. First of all, as Jerry Bergman states here, only about 4 in 10,000 known mutations are presumed to be beneficial. However, these are only beneficial in a very narrow sense since they involve a loss of function. Not one of these mutations unambiguously create a new information. Now, what's he saying here? In the idea of bacteria and becoming resistant, this is what happens. You have bacteria. Let's use a staph infection, a type of staph. This staph bacteria in our system replicates. As it's replicating, and bacteria replicate a whole lot faster than humans. And they can do this by the minute, where we are, every year every 9 months for females. But they're rapidly reproducing, these bacteria. And as they're reproducing, do they get mistakes in their reproduction? Do they get mutations? Yeah, we have a fallen world. They get mutations, just like the rest of us do. And these mutations start to add up in this bacteria population. Now, there is a certain receptor that sits on the cell wall of bacteria. This receptor allows a certain nutrient into that cell. That same receptor is also the receptor that antibiotics attach to, at least penicillins attach to it. In some bacteria, that mutation breaks down that specific binding site. So now, because that site is broken, penicillin can no longer attach to that cell, and now that bacteria has an antibiotic resistance. Now here's the key though, is that bacteria cell that has an antibiotic resistance, that port not only was used for the penicillin, it was also used for a specific nutrient. So while on one hand there's a benefit to the mutation, on the other hand the bacteria is less equipped at living life in the long run. So the benefit is not actually a beneficial mutation that increased information. It's an accidental benefit by a breakdown of something on the cell, and that the benefit is only in a specific location. So if the bacteria is in a body that's taking penicillin, it is now at a beneficial advantage. Take that bacteria out into the environment, you cough it out, some of it comes out, no more antibiotic is there, it's now at a disadvantage. That is a detrimental mutation. And so what we've discovered in actual observable science is that even beneficial mutations that have a perceived benefit in a limited scope, limited environment, still have a net loss of information. They don't tell you this. Every known mutation, by the way, is a net loss of information. Every single one of them. Some might appear neutral, as I had before in the chart. Lots are detrimental, you can notice that. A lot appear neutral. A few, 4 in 10,000, appear beneficial, and yet all of them are a net loss of information. Does that sound like evolution to you, by the way? Net loss for every mutation? Not at all. It's the exact opposite of what they try to tell us. John Sanford said this just a few years ago. Amazingly, there are still no known mutations which unambiguously create or add information, not even the ones that are considered beneficial, like I just said. Werner Gitt said this. However, the fact is that no empirical research has ever shown that matter left to itself is capable of creating universal information. So Werner Gitt wrote the book on information. You want a presuppositional approach to information? There's nobody better than Werner Gitt. And my ministry partner was one that helped out in writing this book and gathering the best scientists in the world to understand what information is. That's a whole different talk, a whole different day. But this guy even came out and said you cannot create information out of nothing. David DeWitt, virtually all mutations represent corruptions to the genetic information. Mutations, even if they were deemed beneficial in some cases, actually represent a loss of information because the original sequence has been damaged. Again, every mutation is a damage to the DNA. It's not additive, it's negative. Here's another PhD guy. He did a simple interval literature search and found 453,732 hits for the word mutations, of which only 186 mention the word beneficial. In those 186 references, the presumed beneficial mutations consistently involved loss of function or loss of information changes. In not a single case was new information created. So this is a guy who actually went through all the research papers known to man at that time. 453,000 and change research papers. And every one of those papers said the exact same thing. No new information has ever been created. These are regular scientific journals. The same scientists that are preaching evolution, telling us that we're crazy, we believe in the spaghetti monster of the sky, are the same ones who have published papers that recognize the error of evolution. And so I'm going to give you one more. So bacterial resistance is one big one I can use. Here's a fun one. Did you know that somebody who has sickle cell anemia is a beneficial mutation? Now, how many of you wants sickle cell anemia right now? None of us, right? So sickle cell anemia is, our hemoglobin is what we call biconcave disc. So hemoglobin is what takes oxygen around our body and our bloodstream. So hemoglobin picks up oxygen in our lungs, delivers it through our body, dumps it off. And they look like two dinner plates back to back. Now, if you have one mutation, it's actually, I know this because it was on a test of mine 20 years ago. The second amino acid on the second beta chain of this, there's one amino acid switched out, and it causes this biconcave disc to look like a moon instead. And what happens is instead of the hemoglobin being able to carry all the oxygen molecules it once could carry, it can now carry only a fraction of the oxygen. If you have sickle cell anemia, a double hit on sickle cell anemia, you have these sickle cells that you can't get as much oxygen around your body, and so you can't function in life the same way. You can't exercise in the same way. You're out of breath far more. Even if you have only one mutation of the two, one is normal and the other one's a mutation, while not everything is sickle-celled, you still have a loss of function in terms of carrying oxygen around your body. Now, here's the kicker. If you live in an area of malaria, malaria cannot attach to your hemoglobin. Which means if you are living in an area of malaria and you have sickle cell anemia, that is a beneficial mutation. You will not die. And yet, if you are normal, have normal hemoglobin, and you get malaria, that's not a good disease to have. You will die without antibiotics. So this is a one I love to use with scientists and say, this is so ridiculous, guys. Beneficial mutation in a limited environment. If somebody is in an area of malaria, great. What happens if I take somebody with sickle cell anemia and bring them to America where we have virtually no malaria? Are they at an advantage or disadvantage? Disadvantage. Major disadvantage. It was a loss of function. It was a loss of genetic information. It was only beneficial in limited scope, limited time. And yet they want to push off beneficial mutations as evolution. So a practical example that I like to use is I like to talk to, and this is exactly how I do it, by the way. I always like to give you a nugget to take that you can actually use today. So this is how I do it. When I'm on a college campus and I'm talking to a college student or even a professor or anybody else in between, I say, okay, how do you guys think we got here? Like, how do people? And sometimes they'll give me a smart aleck answer, smart aleck answer. My mom and dad got together. Yeah, that's great. Okay, I get it. How did humans come about? And they'll say, well, through evolution. I go, okay, so you believe that somehow through billions of random chemical reactions that do nothing but obey laws of chemistry and physics, that somehow you got from the you got from dirt to the single simple cell. Do you agree with me on that? And they'll say, yeah, that's what I believe. So then you believe that going from that single simple cell, we had billions of random chemical reactions doing nothing but obeying laws of chemistry and physics that somehow made all the complex life we see today. Is that true? They'll say, yeah. Okay. So then that means you also believe that going from those complex life forms billions of chemical reactions doing nothing but obeying laws of chemistry and physics, that all of a sudden turned into human beings, you and I. And they'll say, well, yeah, that's right. So we are nothing but matter in motion. We are nothing but random chemical reactions that's occurred. And they'll say, yeah. And I go, you got two problems with that. I go, number one is, are we having a conversation right now? And they'll say, yes. We're having a conversation. Okay, good. Are you controlling your words? Are you controlling your thoughts? Are you listening to me, thinking about what I'm saying, and then actually controlling your words and responses? And they'll say, yeah. I go, here's your problem. You just told me you were nothing but a bag of random chemical reactions. And that you today, right now, standing in front of me, are nothing but a bag of random chemical reactions, doing nothing but obeying laws of chemistry and physics. How do you go from there to being able to control your words and being able to think? That's a problem. So that's one of the things I like to leave them with. And then the other one, of course, is what we just talked about here with mutations. How do you think we got here? You think it was just mutations all the way? How many mutations have ever been discovered that increases information to go from dirt to you? And that's how I will talk to them. You'd be surprised how often people start to break down and it stuns them for just a moment. Even the idea of them being able to converse with us based on their worldview of being random chemical reactions is mind-blowing to them. And then you show them that actual science, observable science, dictates that you can't get mutations to increase information. There is no way we're here other than a creator God. So that's how I like to use this. And we talked about this already. So I'm going to end for the next couple minutes on this. So kids, you're going to enjoy this a little bit more now. Fearfully and wonderfully made. So random chemical reactions is what scientists tell us is how we came about. But I want to talk about now how intricately designed we have been made. How intricately designed we have been woven together in our mother's womb. And in how the design is screaming that God did it. So first of all, the human body is made of about 60 trillion cells. So you didn't need just a few cells to magically evolve out of dirt. You needed 60 trillion of them in an adult. By the way, every cell, there's great videos out there on this, but every cell in our body is made of millions of distinctly designed machines. And every one of those millions of machines are made of more millions of distinctly designed parts. So for this dirt or pond scum to come together into a cell, you needed millions of pieces that were designed to be together, and engineers know this, millions of pieces designed together at the exact same time that all magically fit together into machines at the exact same time that magically made a cell that can live, breathe, eat, give off waste products, and replicate and self-heal. This is what they want us to believe. It's actually ridiculous. An adult human is made of about 7 octillion atoms. Talk about design within our body. Now this is a fun one for kids. Everyone's got a unique tongue print. So the next time somebody wants to fingerprint you, just stick out your tongue and just lick the paper, and that'll do the same thing for you. This is really cool. Our body needs a lot of oxygen. Our brain takes up the vast majority of oxygen that we need. If we took our lungs and we unfolded our lungs, one lung would equal about half a tennis court in size if we unravel all the tissue. So we've got all these little nooks and crannies and outpouchings and whatnot. If we just flattened all that out, half a tennis court. So both of our lungs together is about one whole tennis court worth of tissue. And that's how much we need, how much we're designed to have in order to take in enough oxygen to be able to live. Humans shed about 1.5 pounds of skin each year. So in an average lifetime, we are going to shed 105 pounds of skin. Now, here's a fun fact for you guys, kids especially. This is a good one. Where do all our skin cells go? If we lose 1.5 pounds of skin cells every year, where do those skin cells go? Where do you think? Where do you think they become? Dust. What are you breathing in all day? Dust of your brothers. You're breathing each other's dust cells in. Every square inch of skin on the human body has about 32 million bacteria on it. Most of them are harmless. So we've got tons of little bugs crawling on our skin at any given time. We've got far more than this in our guts. We actually could not live if we didn't have all these specially designed bacteria that live within our guts and help us break down certain foods to be able to live. You eradicate all that, you die. When we touch something, we send a message to the brain at about 120 miles an hour. So if we touch something, my brain knows I touched it. It was 120 miles an hour that traveled back to my brain, almost instantaneously. Pretty fascinating. In 1 square inch of our hand, we have 9 feet of blood vessels in just 1 square inch of our hand, 600 pain sensors, 9,000 nerve endings, 36 heat sensors, 75 pressure sensors. Which means that when we have to spank our kids and we tell you that it hurts us more than it hurts you, it's absolutely true. Red blood cells transport oxygen to the body. White blood cells rush to identify enemy agents in the body, mark them for destruction, specially designed. Here's a good question. How many miles of blood vessels do you think we have in our entire body? Give me a guess. 500, good guess. Anyone else? 1,000. 1,000, okay, good. We have 60,000 miles of blood vessels in a human body. You could take your blood vessels and string them around the earth 2 different times. That's incredible. We have a heart that pumps over 100,000 times a day. Imagine the design of our heart that it's able to live 70 plus years on earth, pumping 100,000 times every day, and you can do it by eating donuts. I mean, I wouldn't do that, but. Each second, you have 2.5 million cells die and be replaced. Some bones are stronger than concrete. We have a nose that can recognize and remember 50,000 different types of smells or scents. We have eyes and ears that are more complex than any man-made machine. More than half your bones are located in the hands, wrists, feet, and ankles. Give us all the dexterity that we have. About 60% of your body is made up of water. We have sneezes that exceed 100 miles per hour. Human skin is replaced about every 35 days. So you have whole new skin every 35 days. You get a new stomach lining every 3 to 4 days. Knowing this, it takes between 7 and 10 years and your entire body is replaced. Every cell in your body. Which means if you don't like your brother, just wait 7 years. You might like the second version of him. Every organ in our body you only have 2 of. You only need 1 to survive. We have protein, amino acids that make up our body. These proteins range in size from about 50 amino acids to 50,000 amino acids, all specially designed. There's trillions of these in the human body. And yet, the way God designed us is that every amino acid in our body is what we call left-handed. Every sugar in our body is right-handed, specially designed that way. This is a different talk for a different day, but one of the ways we show that chemical evolution cannot be true is that in every experiment ever been done, to try to get amino acids to randomly occur, which, by the way, also doesn't occur, but we have specially designed experiments to get amino acids to generate. They come in a 50-50 mix. They don't come in all left-handed amino acids, which is necessary for all life. So it's another catastrophic problem that they have. Human brain is about 3 pounds, trillions of connections, trillions of calculations per second. We have 1 quintillion bits of information stored in our brain at a given time. This is more than all the supercomputers put together. There are approximately 86 billion neurons in your brain woven together by an estimated 100 trillion connections. We have neurons used for processing in the brain, send a message 10 to 50 times every second going on in our brains. We have about 20 billion messages sent every second by our brains. Now, does this sound like it could come out of pond scum to you or dirt? Not at all. This is specially designed by God. Neurons are nerves in the brain that send messages for breathing, talking, eating, walking, thinking. 86 billion neurons in your brain linked together by about 100 trillion connections. Again, 20 billion messages sent. Digital camera in the brain. Digital camera or a phone can store about 100,000 photos. Our brains have the same capacity as 700 million photos. Our brains are unbelievably designed. Nothing on earth comes close to this. Strongest jaw in our muscles located right here in our jaw, called the master muscle. Whose borborygmus bothers other people? You know what borborygmus is? It's when your stomach growls. Why God gave us that, I don't know. We have a liver with over 500 different functions, eyes that are fully grown at birth. It takes 12 muscles to smile and 11 to frown. 37,000 billion chemical reactions are taking place in the body at any given time. As we're sitting here, that's the amount going on continuously. Enzymes. So we could not live unless we had enzymes in our bodies. So it's not good enough to have chemical reactions at work. We have to have enzymes that cause chemical reactions to occur up to millions of times faster than what those chemical reactions would normally occur. We could not live without the enzymes that are sitting in our body that are also made of these proteins. So which came first, the amino acids and the body building blocks, or the amino acids and the enzymes that's needed for the chemical reactions? This all would have had to occur at the exact same time in somebody. How do you make a human? Well, let's start with the following ingredients. The average human is made of 58 pounds of oxygen, 50 quarts of water, 2 ounces of salt, 3 pounds of calcium, 24 pounds of carbon, some chlorine, phosphorus, and fat, iron, sulfur, and glycerin. So all we have to do is mix these together in a bowl, and we get a human being, right? No, not at all. We actually had to be designed. There's even more. I won't get into this because of time here. I know we got to end real quick. But here's the point in all this. How do you make a human? You can't. We can't. Didn't evolve out of nothing. We can't make a human being. God is who did it. Psalm 139, verse 14, I will give thanks to you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. The reality is God created mankind, and he did it on day 6 of creation, which we'll talk about more here during the sermon today. So on that, I thank you, and I don't know if we got any time for questions, or you can hit me up afterwards as well, because we're probably getting pretty close to the time here. Yep. Yeah, we're going to stay for the fellowship meal, and so I'm available. Don't feel, if you want to come ask me any questions, please do that. I'll be around all day today. Any questions you want about Genesis or anything else, doesn't matter. So let's close in prayer. Lord, just thank you for gathering us together today and be able to learn just a little bit more about your human body and just some of the fun science behind it. And, even though there's a lot of scientific facts, Lord, I just pray that the important things, the understanding that we did not come about by accident. We did not come about by just randomness in chemical reactions, but that the only way we could have come about is by being designed by you, and that people who deny you are doing so because of their sin, as we see in Romans 1. They don't have logical arguments. They don't have scientific arguments. They have a spiritual argument, and that's that they don't want to acknowledge who you are, and so they'll pretend that we came about by anything else other than you. I pray that for those people that you bring them to repentance, and you give us the words to say to them as we come across people who don't want to believe in you. It's in your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.